Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce tonight's panel for you. Firstly, Brian Bennett, who has kindly come here tonight to offer his political expertise. He is the former ambassador to Belarus. Irina Bogdanova, who I think now needs no introduction. And Matt Charles, who is the director of the fabulous film we just saw. I'd also like to welcome Julian Assange, who has kindly donated his time to host this discussion this evening. And I will now hand over to him.
So Irina, this is the first time that Irina has seen this film. So I think she's a little bit moved by the experience, understandably. So perhaps we might start first with you, Matt. I first became interested in Belarus in a serious way back in 2009 when I met Sasha Beletsky, who was one of the presidential candidates who had been in prison for about 2 years. And after our meeting together in Oslo, he was imprisoned in relation to the events that you saw in this film. Matt, you worked with Juan Pasquelli in doing this film, and I remember when we had a crew in Turkmenistan who had disappeared. I don't know if Juan has told you this story, but we had 4 people in Turkmenistan doing something who all disappeared and were worried out of our brains. And at that same moment, Juan had a call, and you were having problems and about to be detained, and we wanted you to delete everything in your phone and so on. So can you speak a little bit about what the working conditions were like in making this film? You were undercover. Obviously there's some freedom of movement, but also at the same time some surveillance. So can you speak about how you managed practically to film undercover?
When I've been 2 or 3 times, well, 3 times to Belarus, and the second time I went, I had a cover story that I was a student trying to, I wanted to learn Russian. And so I had to spend 2 days visiting various universities and Russian departments in Minsk. And then I went on making the film, meeting various members of the opposition, going to where Lukashenko came from. Which I have to say was actually quite easy. We stayed in the car, we never got out of the car. We kept the cameras very well hidden. But when I arrived in Minsk for that second trip, I'd rented a flat through the same people I always rented a flat from. And they were driving me from the airport to this apartment. And they stopped outside the KGB headquarters. And my heart sank. And I thought they were playing some kind of practical joke, but they weren't. The flat I was staying in was next door to the KGB headquarters. So yeah. And then on the way out, and Juan has told me that story, when I was leaving Minsk, they stopped me at the airport and took me into a room. But I managed to text Juan and say, they're keeping me. And yeah, it was strange because they knew some of the places I'd been, they knew some of the people I'd met, but they didn't know everything. And why they hadn't stopped me before, I don't know. Maybe because they wanted to get the material. I think they wanted my material.
How do you think they knew some of the places you'd seen, some of the people you met? Is this human sources, or is it telephone interception? What is it?
It could have been any of those. I mean, it could have been people telling them. It could have been they were following me but not following me the whole of the time. But I think they left it until the very end because they wanted the material. But luckily I had managed to get it out across the border to Poland, so I didn't have anything on me, although they didn't believe me and I was strip searched.
How did you come to interact with the Belarusian community and want to make this film?
I first went, I think it was like year 2009, I went there to make a documentary for the BBC on the Belarus Free Theatre, and was just amazed at the work that they do and the people that I met, one of which was Irina's brother, Andrei, and I've interviewed him several times as a journalist.
You'd started making the film before he was imprisoned, or after?
Not this one.
Not
no.
this one.
We started making this film. I was with Irina on the night of the election that you saw in this film. We were screening the first documentary that we made on Belarus in central London at Index on Censorship, in solidarity with the opposition because it was the night of the election. And we were in a situation like this. We were receiving emails, tweets from Andrei and other members of the opposition, and things seemed to be going really well. And then towards the end of the event, it emerged that actually that wasn't the case. And since that moment, Irina's found it very hard to get rid of me.
It was
What Ambassador, what is the state of play right now? There's been this interesting action with the European Union expelling the Belarusian ambassadors from all, is it correct, all 27 European Union states yesterday?
No, the EU ambassador, Myra Moira, was expelled. It was made clear to her that it would be better if she weren't in the country. And the same with the Polish ambassador. And as I understand it, the other members of the EU have recalled their ambassadors. So they haven't been expelled, they've been recalled as a gesture of solidarity. As for my opinion on that, perhaps I should stress that I am retired now. My words should not be taken as those of the British government. It raises the question of whether we actually have a strategy, whether we, the British government, the EU, has a strategy towards Belarus. And to be fair, it's very difficult to have a strategy. The situation is fairly hopeless. But I think this is an example. Withdrawing ambassadors is not a good idea. I lived there for 4 years, and I think one can only truly understand what is happening in Belarus if one is there. There's the body language, there's that sense of fear in the streets, which you don't get when you're outside the country. And the other side of the coin is that do we have an exit strategy for this policy of withdrawing ambassadors? Under what conditions would they go back? And under whatever conditions they go back, Lukashenko is going to say, there you are, I was right all along, and they've come back with their tails between their legs, and I'm going to carry on. And that is, of course, the fundamental problem. It's a black and white situation. It's absolutely hopeless, and will remain hopeless until Lukashenko goes. So the strategy has to involve putting pressure on Lukashenko to get him out some way or another.
What do you think? You said, we were speaking before, and you said you thought one of the problems was that there wasn't a strategy, that Europe didn't have a strategy, Britain didn't have a strategy, that there is no strategy, and perhaps this move is simply reactive. Lukashenko has made a move, Europe has reacted, and now there's a question about how the matter can be resolved. Should there be a strategy of removal or engagement, or engagement and selective pressure?
I think there is no strategy. The EU's understandable approach, perhaps, is we've got to do something. And somehow it doesn't matter what it is that we do. We just have to do something. And that is wrong. I don't think engagement is a good policy, not because engagement doesn't work elsewhere in the world, but because there is no point in talking to Lukashenko. He will simply tell you what you want to hear, make promises that he will sort of keep to, but actually have no substance to them. So there is no point. My line is that it's only by putting him under such stress that he can no longer cope with the situation that things will change. And so the strategy has to be somehow to put the pressure on, both through the economy and through political noise, political complaints, but and complaining about people being in prison without trying to give him a reward for releasing them. That's not going to work. if only because rewarding people like that will lead to further people ending up in prison.
Irina, why do you think not many people care about Belarus, or it's not part of the European calculus?
In all honesty, it's a real puzzle to me because Belarus is in the center of Europe. It is a European country. And I still don't understand why so little attention is given to Belarus. We know how much attention was getting, Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, Syria, Iran, and quite rightly so. But Belarus is not better at all, and it is in the center of Europe. So actually one of the reasons we're all here today, it's spread the word and raise the awareness, and that's why I'm extremely grateful to Mark, Charles and Juan for making this film, because hopefully more and more people will see what it's like to live in Belarus, first of all, and secondly, to have their loved ones in prison. And as I said in the film, it's not just 17 people who are left in prison now are in prison. It's 10 million people live in prison now.
What's the current status with your brother Andrei? Is there a change since what we saw in the film?
Yes, there is a little bit of a change, a little bit of a improvement. On one hand, it's horrible to say that knowing that he is alive and knowing where he is, it's an improvement. We now know which prison he is in, and we know he is alive, but that's about it. We absolutely know nothing about it.
What are the formal allegations against the presidential candidates, the five who were put in prison?
Actually, they are different, believe it or not, even though they've all been on a square, but after a while they changed their allegations. But to Statkevich and Sannikov, who remain in prison, the allegations are organizing the mass disturbances, which you've seen people walking on the streets very peacefully, in a long run from one square to another. Not even one rubbish bin was overturned. So what sort of violence or disturbance they are talking about? It's absurd.
I met you before at Hay, and I've seen this transition that you've had in the film, which I think Matt documented quite well, where to begin with you were just a sister, and now you're a campaigner, and you seem much stronger than you did in the beginning. Can you speak a bit about perhaps what this experience was like for you, but in a practical sense, that you have now become, if you like, a proper activist, and advice you might have for other activists, people fighting for the liberation of their loved ones, or others in a similar position? How did you manage to negotiate that experience?
I'm glad you think I'm a proper activist, because I don't. I'm still a sister and who fights for my family, because it's obviously, you've seen, it's not only my brother who's in prison, it's my sister-in-law who lives under horrendous condition under house arrest, and the police can barge in at any time of the day, and she is just a single woman there with a small child. I have a very strong sense of justice, so it probably helps me to keep going and keep fighting for all political prisoners. At the moment, I'm extremely concerned about Sergei Kovalenko, and I actually, once we finish talking, I would like us all to say Живе Belarus in support of him, because he is in prison only for raising the flag, Belarusian flag, white, red, white flag, and he is on a hunger strike. Instead of shouting, screaming, protesting, it goes unnoticed. And I think that sense of justice helps me to keep going, and the understanding that I can't sit and do nothing. I can't sit and watch countries being, genocide happening in my country. The best people are being tortured, imprisoned, repressed. People are being let die in prison, I just can't watch it and do nothing. That's why I'm campaigning, and that's why we started this Free Belarus Now campaign, and I would like to ask you all to support us in whatever way you can, even if you just tell somebody about what you've seen today, what you've learned about Belarus. That will be fantastic. I will be very grateful.
Alexander Balaski, Sasha, before he was placed in prison, told me that the big problem for him was not prison, it was that his family outside of prison, his daughters, were economically marginalized, and that they couldn't even marry because their husbands would be economically excluded from any functional social utility. Is there not just the political prisoners, but once they come out, people are under house arrest, people are economically marginalized. Is that true, this comment to me?
It's, yeah, it is absolutely true. Unfortunately, we were going to have a form of political prisoner here today. Unfortunately, there were some traveling problems and he couldn't come. Otherwise, he would have been able to tell you firsthand about his experience. But I am in touch with all, or majority of ex-political prisoners, which I hesitate even to call them ex, because they are still under such a surveillance. They're not allowed to work. Some of them are speaking to me on Skype only and still fearful of being overheard. They still can't say what they want. Their families in horrendous conditions. Some send their families to live in the country, in the village, just to protect them from repressions. And it's just happened. Unfortunately, this plague is spreading. More and more people are being repressed in Belarus, and more people either losing their jobs or threatened or imprisoned for absolutely nothing. You can be just happen to be in the wrong place in the wrong time, and you will be accused of swearing on the streets and placed into prison.
Irina, where do you think it's going the next 5 years? Lukashenko just had an election. The Russian election is on March the 4th, and Putin seems to be giving out concessions at a tremendous rate in order to stay in power, and will undoubtedly win the March election. But do you think that tendency for reform in Russia might spill over into Belarus?
It is not an easy question, because, as I keep stating, I'm not a politician. I can't really predict what's going to happen. I don't think politicians can either. What I would like to happen, of course, I would like for the EU and US support Belarus in a position, not just a position, the democratic movement in Belarus, and help us to change the regime and help us to become a democratic country. That's what I'm hoping for, that it will happen sooner rather than later. And from my point of view, yes, of course, I would like all prisoners to be released tomorrow and for it to be a condition of the ambassadors coming back. But in a way, in this sense, Brian is right, that it's again using the political prisoners as a bargaining chip, which is absolutely wrong, because then we will be back to square one and nothing will change in the country. So we really need to have a support of EU and pressure on Lukashenko to step down and start changing country towards democracy.
Yeah. So, perhaps we can open up now to the panel. Unfortunately, I have to go. Is that right? I have to go. We have our own problems here as well. So,
well, there's a question I'd like to ask Brian, actually, so we could...
Perhaps.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time and comment.
Just coming back to the Russia point, I think we've had a conversation about this before, Brian, how Russia is key to engaging, to sorting out the problem in Belarus. But do you think the kind of domestic issues that Putin might have in his next term, assuming that he does win the election, provide an opportunity for the EU to exert more influence over Belarus or not?
I don't claim to be an expert on Russia, but I think Putin will win the election. I don't think there's much doubt about that. I do think that Putin and others see the world in Cold War terms, and that's quite good for Belarus from the point of view that thus far and no further. So the borders of the Soviet Empire and the Russian Empire have shrunk to a point where people like Putin say, well, that's it, no more. Putin, as we know, doesn't like Lukashenko, to put it mildly, but he'd rather have him there than have the Americans or the Europeans. So he's quite keen to keep the Europeans out. But I don't think it's a feature of Russian politics. I don't think that Putin particularly cares about Belarus. It's a small place. It's not vital to his economy. All he cares about is the gas pipelines and the oil refineries, the energy elements in Belarus. And as long as he can control them, Gazprom has control over them, then that's okay. Going back to an earlier point, if I may, there is no prospect of reform in Belarus. It's always back to Lukashenko. Lukashenko is not Belarus. Lukashenko is not the people of Belarus, but he is in control of the place. He cannot afford reform. If he reforms, then his power collapses, and the only thing that he cares about is staying in power. So that's not going to happen. That's why I talk about a black and white situation. So Russia does have influence, but is not prepared to use it in the way that we would like. The EU, the rest of us, at least those at some distance from Belarus, have no influence. It's a question, it's a political play, but it's not for real.
I feel like I've been promoted. Does anyone have any questions for any of us?
What can we do? Well, as I've said, I think it all comes back to Lukashenko. The answer is to put as much pressure on him as we possibly can, so that he will crack as he did in 2001 and 2006. I was there in 2006. He disappeared for a couple of weeks, and nothing happened during that period. When I say nothing happened, there was just a void from the presidential office. But also, nobody rose up and thought, this is my opportunity to push Lukashenko to one side. He's got control over that country, even when he's lying down and unable to do anything himself. There are people there who know that their well-being, perhaps their lives, depend on his continuing in power. So he does have that amount of support. So what we've got to do is increase pressure. And to go back to another point of Irina's, why don't we care about these people in prison, care about what's happening in Belarus? The answer is because we don't know about it. And if we can raise the profile of Belarus, get people talking about Belarus, then maybe that will contribute to putting the pressure on Lukashenko.
To start with, you can read the brilliant book that Brian wrote, and it's been released very recently, and it gives such an extensive background of what's happening, so it will help you to understand more. Free Belarus Now campaign is running quite a few different sort of campaign on a different level, and one of the things that we are at the moment trying to achieve is to move a hockey championship from Belarus into another country, because we believe that it's It's very cynical to have such a big event in a country when people are tortured, killed, disappeared, and every possible human right is violated and abused. So you can join us in support of that, because the final decision is not made yet. We bombarded national federations and international federation with letters. You can join your voice to do that with us. And not to mention the fact, coming back to the pressure on Lukashenko, hockey is the favorite sport of Lukashenko, so it will absolutely crack him if the championship is moved. I know it sounds like petty thing to do, but it's not. It's what he understands. He understands very simple measures and the position of strength. So writing to political prisoners, writing to their families letters of support, because they are in complete isolation, and the government is trying to make them believe that nobody cares, that the world doesn't know that they're in prison, that they can be killed, tortured, and nobody cares. So show them that you do care, show your support to them, and yet talk to other people, tell what's going on in Belarus. And even that will be fantastic. If you want to do more, you can find much more ways of helping us on our website, freebelarusnow.org. It definitely unsettles them a lot that when in the past we've done this flooding of prisons with the postcards from all over the world, it definitely shows guards the pressure they are under, because they will think twice how they're treating prisoners.
Something that we can all do as well, and it's very simple, is just tweet about it, share the news, read about it, and talk about it with people, and the media might just pick it up and create a little bit more pressure, which we all know they haven't so far. So.
I'm here from NTV TV, so
thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We are a Japan Chinese station, and we actually censor in China. We also suffer from censorship, and so we are in the same ordeal. So
Thank you very much.
So, if he is, obviously, he's quite an old man.
No, he's not.
How old is he?
58. Will be 58 in August.
Okay, because I guess imagine some kind of European North Korea situation. He must be grooming somebody or people in his cabinet to carry on his vision. Are you preparing in some way for a power vacuum? As you say, in those 2 weeks when he wasn't there and no one stepped up, is there a way that you can convince maybe other people like him or your brother to step into this power vacuum after what happened in 2011?
I will have to ask Brian to answer this question, but from my point of view, the situation now is very, very different. 5 years gone since that time, and the support of Lukashenko in the country is minimal now. When at that time, people in villages, as you've seen in the film, or it was mentioned in the film, there was a support of Lukashenko. Now it's not, and even within his own, the officials. Support is really going. So I would think that if he cracks down now, something definitely will happen. But I'd rather let an expert talk about it.
Well, I don't know about being an expert, but I hope that various capitals around the world have a strategy for what happens when Lukashenko goes. But I don't think they see him going very soon. And history tells us that dictators don't say, okay, I've had enough of that, I'll do something else tomorrow. They just hang on, and the situation gets worse and worse. So the prospects for Belarus are not good. But how do you remove someone like that, someone who doesn't want to go? There is no sign in Belarus of any gradual progress towards liberalization. It's not happening. The trend is the other way. So there is no grounds on which to build. Invading to impose democracy has gone out of favour. So that's an option that's ruled out too. So we have somehow to increase the pressure on Lukashenko, but we don't have the tools. The only ones who have the tools are perhaps the Russians, and they don't want to get involved in that.
But I think at the same time, you know, we do need to do whatever we can to help Belarusian people in their fight. EU started to do much more now to help democratic society, and they're working under extremely difficult conditions, but nevertheless steps are taken, and a lot of politicians now are talking, and they've started to develop a strategy for Belarus after Lukashenko. And I think even that message sends a very strong kind of message to Lukashenko that things will change. Sooner or later things will change, and the world around will be prepared to help Belarus. And it's one message, one thing it's a message to Lukashenko, but another thing it's a message to Belarusian people that actually Europe sees them as part of Europe, not a country as an outcast, or Northern Korea or something like that. Europe wants Belarus to be part of Europe, and I think this message needs to be stronger, and we, as just people living abroad, we can reinforce this message by supporting people in Belarus.
And sorry, just to add that it's not a failed state. It does have a proper structure. It's got a good education, good culture, well-intentioned people, friendly, good people. When Lukashenko goes, the country will not collapse and wander around wondering what to do. All the jigsaw pieces are there to create something that we can all be optimistic about. But there will be a transition. I do not believe that anything like the Lukashenko regime will continue after Lukashenko. So our number one aim is to try to ease Lukashenko out of the situation he's in.
We only have 5 more minutes, sadly, so we'll do 2 quick questions. You and I can't see, but there's someone jumping up and down. Yes.
Thank you for this question. Desperately, the answer is I need money because you know, over
the bucket outside.
No, we do have on our website. We do have a donate button, so you're very welcome to donate money. Yeah, obviously there is a bucket outside, and it's not. My campaign manager was going to talk about it. She's much better than I'm equipped to talk about it, so I'll just put, you know, I'm surrounded by experts now. I actually created a very good niche to myself now. I'm just running the campaign, they do the job.
Thank you, Irina. We have actually today launched a new funding bid on the site Sponsume. If you could all visit that, that would be wonderful. The web address is sponsume.com/projects/free-Belarus-now. There are handouts as you leave, so you don't need to remember that.
Don't need to remember that, yeah. Yes, we are applying. We were sort of sending projects out, and because we've done a lot of work over the last year, we are recognized now, and hopefully you know, funds that are supporting human rights campaigns and things like that, hopefully will be responsive to us this year. Thank you very much for the question. And another question was?
It's happening now.
No, will we expel Belarusian ambassadors in return? Do you think that will happen?
There aren't many of them. There are 27 members of the EU, but the Belarusians don't have an embassy in each of them. I don't know the answer to your question, but I can't see much point in it. I don't see that tit for tat is can be raised to the level of being a strategy. So, but I don't know the answer.
Sadly, we have to leave, but we are having drinks outside, so do join us, and thank you for coming and showing your support.
And as I said, in the support of people of Belarus, and particularly, as I said, I want to dedicate it to Sergei Kovalenko, who is on a hunger strike for nearly 70 days now, and still going. He's not going to stop. Shall we all say, Живе Belarus! Живе Belarus! Живе Belarus! Живе Belarus! Живе